Okay, in this one we're going to have a look at persisting data in between requests so that our application recognizes when it's the same user making those requests. The way we're going to do this is by using a session. Choose high definition for the best viewing experience, and if you'd like to join a growing group of software developers and take your skills to a new level, all you need to do is subscribe, click the little notification icon and welcome. And so, bit of revision first. I'll demonstrate using Amazon. As you can see, if you look up in the top right hand corner there, it shows my name and it shows I've got one item in the basket. So Amazon actually knows who I am, and I can go and visit different pages on here, and in between requests, if you look in the top corner there, it still knows who I am, and I can actually go and add more items to the basket. For example, if I just go to here, buy one of these, add that to the basket also, and then you'll see there's two items in the basket, and we can still carry on navigating around the site. It knows who I am and it knows that I have those two items in the basket. Now, HTTP is a stateless protocol. It doesn't automatically know who is making these requests for the web pages in between each one. As far as HTTP is concerned, it's just a separate each request is being made by a separate client each time, and so the way we make it remember is using the session, and it looks like this. So on the initial request, a session gets started. The client, which in our case was my browser, requests a resource of the server, and the server responds with a resource, that being the Amazon web page that we were after, and a unique session ID. So this happens on the first time that a session needs to be started. That unique session ID is stored in a cookie in the headers and sent back to the client, and so the client then has that session ID which it sends with each subsequent request, and so the server can see that session ID. It knows who we are. There's a file which gets kept on the server for that particular session, and it can go and retrieve the data from that file. And then with each response, the server remembers the user, the session ID, and it can return personalized data which is stored in that session file. It doesn't always have to be stored in a session file. There are different ways of doing it. You can store session data in a database or in things like key value stores like Redis. What we're going to do though is we're going to keep it nice and simple and just store it in the session files, because we're not actually going into this in great complexity. We're just demonstrating the principle and how it actually works. Okay, so let's get a local server up and running, and then we'll start the session, and then we'll print out the session ID and just have a little look at what that looks like, and we'll also have a look at the cookie which gets sent with the header. Okay, so over to the terminal, PHP capital S uppercase and then localhost :8000. So I now have a local development server working, which is a nice way to just get up and running quickly. The way we start the session is using this function here, session start, and so you still include this with every time you send a new request. However, what it'll do is it'll check, see if there's a session running, and then it'll use that data in that session on subsequent requests. If a session isn't running, then obviously it starts it here. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to print out the session ID, which we can do with this function here, session ID. Okay, let's go over to our browser and have a look at what this looks like. And so our file was called session page 1. Okay, and that's the session ID, believe it or not. So let's go and inspect the cookie. If I hit Alt Command J and then I go over to the network tab and just give this a refresh, and then click on session page 1, and you'll see these request cookies here. The one we're looking for, the session cookie, is this PHP SESSID, and you'll notice that that value OT19 and it ends in 049 is our session ID. So our application is now able to recognize when it's the same user making subsequent requests, and so what we can do is actually store some data in the session we'll click a link which navigates us away from the current page to another page, and that data that we saved in the session, we'll be able to view it on another page. Okay, and the way that we store data in the session is we use the session superglobal, and that looks like this. So later on, what we're going to do in a couple of videos time or whatever is we'll actually create our own session class which will connect to this stuff under the hood. But for now we're just going to do it quite procedural, just a bit of revision on how session works. So what we'll have is an auth ID, so this is kind of typical. We'll just set it to 123, and then we can have a username, so session and then username, and if I can actually spell it right, username, that looks good, and we'll just say at Gary Clarke Tech. Okay, and then what we want to do is click a link which takes us away from this page. So I've got a link here, and that's going to take us to a page called session page 2. And so if we have a look here, here's session page 2, and I'm going to retrieve that data, auth ID and username. And so I think I'll borrow this actually, and we'll paste this on our first page, and we'll change that to session page 1. Okay, let's go and visit our page again. And so refresh. It's still showing our session ID. I think what we'll do is we'll comment that out. Okay, so we're on session page 1. I'm going to click on this link. This will navigate us away from that page, but the data that we stored in the session should be persisted, and we should be able to view it on session page 2. So I'll click on here, and there, as you can see, there's the data which we stored in our session page 1, and it's now been persisted to the session, and we can view it in session page 2. Just a quick note, remember what I said about starting the session. We still need to include the session start on session page 2. So what it will do is it will check, see if there's a session already started, see that there is, and then it will go and fetch the data for that session. Anyway, why not have a quick practice at this yourself? On session, create the same files that I've done there, session page 1 and session page 2. On session page 2, actually set your own session variable, and then add a link on there which navigates to another page. Let's call it session page 3, and then print out that the value of that session variable on session page 3. Don't forget that you'll need to include the session start function at the top of the file. So pause me, give it a go. I'll do that now. So here, so to set a variable, I shall call it phone, and then just use the assignment operator, and then we'll just put in some random numbers, 44 for UK, and then some random numbers. Looks a bit long for a phone number, but that's okay. And then I'm going to create a new page called session page 3. So session page 3, and then I'm going to do session start. Okay, and then I'm just going to, what I'll do is I'll borrow a line from here, and we'll echo out phone. Okay, so I need a link to navigate me to session page 2, so I remembered there was one on session page 1. I'll go and steal this. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. I'll navigate back to session page 1, click me, and then it's got another click me link, and we should see my phone number on session page 3, and we do. So hope you had a go at it, hope you managed that, and maybe you already knew this stuff, but you can never revise the basics enough, because I forget this kind of stuff all the time. Okay, let's move on, and we'll look a bit further into authentication, and we'll eventually create our own session class. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like YouTube to show you more of my content, all you need to do is subscribe and click the little notification icon. I release new recordings every few days. Details of my schedule can be found on the community tab of my YouTube channel homepage.